Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very senior and respected naval officer and a senior corporate leader from Noida, India, Rear Admiral Surendra Ahuja, VSM. Admiral Ahuja, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Admiral Ahuja has been the former managing director of Boeing Defense in India, and he's been a former rear admiral of the Indian Navy, now retired. So, Surendra, let me start by asking you, how did your journey in naval aviation begin, and what inspired you to become a Navy fighter pilot and later a Navy test pilot?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question and takes me back all the way to 1985 when I joined the Navy. So just for context for yourself and for the viewers, in the Navy, one could opt to do any of the three things like sail on ships. So that's called surface Navy. You could decide to join submarines, in which case you will be underwater. Or you could be a naval aviator, in which case you will fly in the third dimension.
Right.
So it's a huge opportunity, unlike the Air Force or the Army, which typically operate in one. Army now has started operating in two dimensions. They also have it's sort of a relatively smaller version of Air Force of their own, Army Aviation, but it's not as mature and as big as the naval era. So I got commissioned into the Indian Navy in 1985. I wasn't really sure what I would do. Very young, all of 20 and a half or 21 or thereabouts. And it just happened to be that 1986, just a year after I had got commissioned, Top Gun, the first version of Top Gun. And of course, then a sequel came recently, Top Gun Maverick. So Top Gun version 1, or the first sort of Top Gun 1, let's call it, got released in 1986. And that took my generation by storm. There is just no other word for it.
Right.
Actually, the Top Gun got released by Hollywood in coordination with the US military. The Pentagon was themselves involved. Their aim really was to enhance the attractiveness of the armed forces after Vietnam and some experiences that were not really very good, to say the least. And youngsters had sort of stopped to join the armed forces, and particularly the naval air arm, because the aircraft carriers operated off Vietnam coast, and there were significant losses, or at least let's say successes were not as good. Body bags, and you heard all of that.
Yeah.
So Pentagon collaborated with Hollywood, and they made what we all know as Top Gun. It was just an absolutely glamorous movie. They had no idea that they will end up encouraging people way beyond the shores of United States. So a generation along with me really chose to be naval aviators. So that's how I sort of became a naval aviator. I opted for it, was fortunate to have got selected. Initially, I trained with the Indian Air Force for a while. And because Navy does not have a aviation school of their own. And then those who do well get selected to be fighter pilots. That's how I sort of became fighter pilot. That's exactly the path that Maverick, the protagonist in the movie, Tom Cruise, had followed. And then it took me to an aircraft carrier, flew exactly in the nature that he had flown. And then you asked me test pilot. Essentially, as you grow up in your career, as a naval aviator, you are presented with two options as you sort of, if you are among the better ones. Either you could become a flight instructor, or you could choose to be a test pilot. I chose to be a test pilot because that offers greater opportunities, and we might discuss more of that in the podcast later. So it was just a fascinating journey, and I really enjoyed it. And it's just unimaginable that I got paid for all that.
Amazing. But, coming back to Top Gun, I wanted to ask you, how close is the movie to real life experiences of naval aviators, especially when it comes to carrier operations?
Yeah, it's pretty close. I would say, given that Pentagon and the US Navy were involved in the making of this, they offered all their platforms and offered all expertise that is required. It's close. It's just on steroids.
Okay.
They have glamorized it, dramatized exactly how Bollywood also does. But it's pretty close to the environment. I would just say they've just made it look a little easier than it is.
Yeah.
It's pretty demanding. But yes, it gives a very good insight into life aboard an aircraft carrier. You got to fly from a small airfield, which is rolling,
Yeah.
pitching, yawing. I mean, just all kinds of things again.
Yeah.
So we could perhaps talk more about that later. But just
Absolutely.
they've done a good job.
You also spoke about your being a test pilot. I've always heard, I'm not an aviator, I know very little about aircraft, but I've always heard that you're trained for one type of aircraft. You have been an experimental test pilot flying over 22 different types of aircraft. What was this experience like?
Yeah, so test pilots typically get to fly larger number of aircraft. In fact, the whole aim of the test pilots course of the program is really to expose a pilot. I mean, it's a very deep selection process before you sort of choose to join that training. It's 1 year of intense training, and I trained with the Indian Air Force, which again, Indian Navy does not have a school of their own
Right.
for test flying. So you go to Indian Air Force and come back and fly with the Navy. After about 2-3 years, you do a program and then you fly with the Air Force, their planes, do some programs for them, and then you come back to the Navy and do naval programs. So the whole idea of being a test pilot is that you get exposed to all kinds of aeroplanes from different origins so that you can decide and figure out what works better. Essentially, if you were to drive, let's say, Maruti Suzuki all your life, you wouldn't know what Mercedes has to offer or BMW has to offer. So once you've sort of driven a number of cars, and if you were to then assist designers in making a new car or testing a new car, you would be able to bring your experience to bear in that new car. So that's exactly what experimental test pilot does. So you get to fly aircraft of different origins. Sometimes the French do some things better than the Americans, and some things Russians do better than. And typically, I would say being a test pilot in India is a great honor. And why do I say that? Because India flies aeroplanes of various origins.
Correct.
You get to fly the French, you get to fly the Russian, you get to fly the American machines, the British. I mean, it's just amazing experience. So that is what sort of really
amazing.
And then that's how I got to fly 22 different types of aircraft.
Amazing. And when I was preparing for my conversation with you, I was fascinated to see that there's something called vectored thrust. So you've flown vectored thrust equipped Sea Harrier, and then later your role in the flight evaluation of the MiG-29K. How are these two aircraft different?
Yeah, I mean, it's chalk and cheese. It's just completely different. So very quickly, I think it's a little bit of background into the Harrier would be relevant here. The Harrier is very different from a conventional fixed-wing aircraft. A conventional fixed-wing aircraft has the thrust or the nozzles or the exhaust pointing backwards. Newton's third law propels the aircraft forward. So that's how you get your forward velocity.
Right.
But then as far as the lift is concerned, that means you want to keep the aircraft in the air, you got to depend upon the lift that is generated by the wings or the aerofoils. Largely by the wings, some fuselage also generates.
Right.
But in the Harrier, because the intention was to be able to come to a zero speed in the air, should be able to hover like a helicopter, should be able to land at zero speed like a helicopter, and take off also, if required, like a helicopter at zero speed. Now you had to create lift from somewhere at zero speed. Lift, as I said, comes because of forward speed through the air.
Right.
Now you had to generate lift equal to the mass of the aircraft, or perhaps better it so that you can go up for takeoff. So you did what is called as vectoring the thrust. So they developed the science and technology behind being able to vector your thrust all the way from fully aft to fully down, fully back to fully down 90 degrees. So when you vectored your thrust 90 degrees and opened power, the aircraft would go up, or you could vector it at any angle between fully aft and fully down, and then you can fly at lower speeds. So it's just crazy that a component of your thrust is pointing forwards if you're anywhere between 0 and 90 degrees, and another component is pointing upwards. So you can decide what speed you will take off today at. You can decide what speed you will land today at. And of course, if you're on the Harrier would typically land at 0 speed and take off at a slightly forward speed, lower speed than normally aeroplanes could. So I mean, it's a marvel. MiG-29K on the other end is a conventional fixed wing aircraft. Except that it flies from the aircraft carrier, therefore it has a tail hook and has the ability to go off a ski jump. So there are some similarities in terms of short takeoff capability, because of the thrust the MiG-29K has. You're able to go off the ski jump, but land, you have to land conventionally, in which case you'll be arrested aboard the carrier. I mean, people who've seen Top Gun will know, you arrive at very high forward speeds, you have your tail hook down, and you get arrested by those wires which are lying across the deck, 3 or 4 of them. It requires very precise landing. So that's the sort of huge difference between them in the way sort of your thrust is oriented.
Fascinating. And you were just telling me about how you land these aircraft on an aircraft carrier. My next question is, what are some of the unique challenges associated with flying from the deck of an aircraft carrier? And what was your first experience landing on an aircraft, and how did you prepare for it?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, all of us have been in aeroplanes as passengers, and you take off from an airfield which is 3 kilometers plus long. So typically 10,000 feet plus, all big airfields, in various towns and cities. And then you come back and land again on those long airfields. Just imagine yourself on finals, on approach, let's say, to Delhi airport. And now let's build a scenario around you. You cannot see anything other than water around you, A. B, the airfield shrinks in size from 3 kilometers or 10,000 feet to just 200 odd meters. So about, let's say, 450, 500, 600 feet. Again, the carriers are of various sizes. And now that's as though if that wasn't enough, the Delhi airport now starts to move away from you at 40, 50 kilometers. So the ship is moving, your airfield is moving. And that's not enough. The airfield now starts to roll. I mean, I think I'll show it by my hand expression. Because a ship in the middle of ocean gets affected by water, wind, and other elements. And pitch. So it's rolling, it's pitching, it's yawing. So all axes. So now your airfield is small, it's in the middle of water, it's moving away from you, it's rolling, it's pitching, it's yawing. So just so those are the constraints under which everything has to be designed. And again, it's a small airfield, lots of airplanes on it, therefore constrained space. You got to be careful about not hitting somebody. Very unlike huge airports where there's a lot of space, airplanes are dispersed around. So it just imposes a number of constraints, both on designers to make sure the airplane is operable in environments such as that, and of course the aircrew, the pilots, who then have to learn those skills.
Right.
So it's just pretty interesting and very demanding.
Very interesting. And could you also talk a little bit about the experience of conducting night operations? Because you told me about how the ship is moving on all axes. But now imagine it's night. What are some of the challenges this one more dimension presents?
Before that, let me cover the second part of your last question.
Okay.
How did I prepare for the first landing?
Please. Yes, please.
So landing aboard an aircraft carrier, as I just mentioned, presents lots of challenges. So whether it's the Harrier or the MiG-29K or the GOSOC, I mean, I flew. I was deputed with the U.S. Navy for a substantial period of time, where I flew their aircraft from their aircraft carrier. In fact, I became the first Indian pilot ever to arrest aboard a U.S. carrier in 2007.
Okay.
So, but before you come anywhere close to an aircraft carrier, you got to do the same thing ashore. That means on a land-based sort of airfield multiple times. On a Harrier, you got to land vertically on an airfield safely for 50 times, 50 times safely, graded by a flying instructor before you're allowed to come solo anywhere close to an aircraft carrier. Because any incident about an aircraft carrier, you can imagine, not just sort of damage to your aeroplane and perhaps your life, but you could also damage a number of other airplanes that are parked very close vicinity. So therefore, you do 50 times that. And if it is a conventional aircraft like the MiG-29K or the GOSOC or the F-18, etc., or the Rafale maritime version, which the Indian Navy is going to buy soon, you do similar thing ashore, what is called as field carrier landing practice. So on a strip or on a runway, they earmark an area where you must touch down, because as I just mentioned, it's a small airfield for you out there. You got to land within a very finite zone, otherwise you will miss those wires. There are only just 3 or 4 wires, you got to take them.
Right.
So so you practice that a large number of times ashore, and then again each landing of yours is graded by a qualified flying instructor. You're debriefed on it, and once you sort of develop that expertise adequately, you may or may not have arrestor wires ashore. But once you get arrested in a wire, then rest of the stopping happens by itself. That really doesn't need so much of practice. In India, of course, we now have arrestor wires ashore in Goa. There's a ski jump there as well. So you sort of practice that. And one key difference between landing at an airfield on shore vis-a-vis landing aboard a carrier is, I think, worth mentioning that when you are coming into land aboard an aircraft carrier, because the touchdown zone is so really small, you come with your hook down, but you cannot afford to flare and float. Because if you flare and float and reduce the rate of descent, you will scatter your landing touchdown. You want to touch down precisely at that place where 2 or 3 or 4 wires are. So you do not reduce the rate of descent on. So it's essentially a controlled crash into the deck.
Wow.
Whatever rate of descent you have on finals, you go and touch down with the same rate of descent, and only then you can be a little more precise. And of course, there are some other electronic aids that are helping you do that. And as soon as you touch down, your hook takes one of those wires, and then while you hope to get arrested, but you also prepare not to get arrested. So after touching down, you open full throttle, which is again very counterintuitive. Which is very counterintuitive to let's say on the runway, on a shore-based runway, wherein you touch down and throttle back because now you want to reduce speed. Here you touch down and open full throttle just in case you don't get the wire.
Right.
You should be able to take off again. Otherwise, it's such a small airfield. So you touch down. If you get arrested, you feel the sort of deceleration on your body. You know that you arrived. Then you can throttle back. But if you haven't got the wire, you haven't felt the deceleration, significant deceleration, because you got to stop within 90, 100 meters, then you are going off again and make another attempt.
Wow.
Now, think of doing all that at night. First, I painted that picture of, lack of orientation. It's water all around you, no visual cues. And you see your airfield only just 40 or 50 seconds just before you're landing, because it's a small little matchbox in the ocean that you got to go and land on. So you're seeing it only at the last minute, effectively, literally and figuratively, really. And then that airfield is rolling, pitching, yawing, moving away from you as though it doesn't want to accept you. You got to just go get one of those wires. So it's just very, very dramatic. I mean, it might be instructive to note that one of the US astronauts, I don't remember who that was, or was it Neil Armstrong or somebody else? Typically, all US astronauts in the beginning were naval test pilots. They said, I don't remember who, perhaps Neil Armstrong, he said that of all the things he's done in his life, and this is after having landed on moon, was the night landing aboard aircraft carriers during his sort of active years in the Navy. So.
Fantastic. Thank you. Surendra, you are also the founder leader of the Indian Navy's Formation aerobatic team, Sagar Pavan, back in 2003. How is formation flying different from normal flying? And we all see this on 26th January, and we often wonder, they're so close. How do you people do it?
Yeah, again, very fortunate to have sort of established the Naval Formation Aerobatic Team. Just for context, there are only two navies in the world that have Formation Aerobatic Team. One is, of course, US Navy. They have Blue Angels on F-18 Super Hornet. And Indian Navy started on Kirans. Unfortunately, that team has now been disbanded because those Kirans have been sort of decommissioned. But coming back to your question as to how and it's different, essentially, when you're formating on an aircraft, you're flying so close to them that you cannot afford to take your eyes off them. Let's say you're the right member and you're formating on a leader who's ahead of you. Your wingtips are just a few feet away from his or her wingtip. So if you take your eyes off them, of the leader who you're formating on, you could easily, have a collision. So therefore, you aren't looking at inside your aircraft at all. You have no idea what your height is. You have no idea what your speed is. You have no idea where you are. Your aim is to just stay on the same plane as the leader, same angle and same displacement. And that can be done only if you're constantly looking at him or her. So therefore, at his plane, now there are some points on the aircraft that you got to keep in line and stuff like, so that your sort of distance remain exactly the same. Constantly. So if for some reason, let's say your lead aircraft ends up making a mistake, you do a loop and the aircraft doesn't recover and goes into the sea or goes into the ground, there is a real possibility that the entire formation will go into the ground, because they are not looking outside at all. And there have been at least 2 or 3 formation aerobatic accidents where leader, for some reason, could not pull out in time, lost height, or maybe some mechanical failure and didn't have enough time to transmit. The entire formation has gone into the sea or ground. I mean, at least 2 or 3, if somebody Googles, you'll find. So that's the significant difference. It's complete trust on your leader. And then you are formatting on somebody, maybe there's somebody else formatting on you. Because you start making a mistake, then the other person will make a mistake as well. So there are formations which are as wide as 9 aircraft. So just think of that problem magnified as the formation becomes bigger. Flying straight and level is one thing, but aerobatic displays, teams do aerobatic during while flying in formation. So think of doing a loop in formation. Think of doing a roll. I mean, it's just crazy. So
I can imagine. I mean,
again, full focus and complete trust.
I've only seen it as a spectator, and I've often wondered. But now that you've explained it, it is obviously very, very complicated, and a lot of training must be going into it. So, Surendra, I have time for just one more question. We're running out of time. I wanted to talk to you about your innings with Boeing, but maybe we'll schedule some other time of your new avatar as in the private sector. But my last question to you, given your experience with the Indian Navy, what are some of the cutting edge advancements in naval aviation that excite you the most today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So maybe I'll expand that a little bit. In the Navy, maybe we'll focus more on naval aviation, but there are some real, cutting edge technologies that are coming in the whole system of military warfare, but more particularly in the Navy, since I wore the white uniform for a long time. But let's focus on aviation first. First is the introduction of unmanned aerial vehicles in the domain. So, I mean, you've heard of drones. Nowadays, unmanned aerial vehicles are doing all kinds of things. And now think of all the complications that we spoke about flying from an aircraft carrier, and think of all that being done by an unmanned aerial vehicle. And it's already been done in the United States. They've done trials. They haven't yet inducted an unmanned aerial vehicle from the aircraft carriers formally, but they've done trials, and I've seen videos of them. In fact, my company, Boeing, developed an unmanned aerial tanker. It's surreal to see an unmanned aerial vehicle landing aboard an aircraft carrier and then getting engaged in those wires and then taxiing autonomously and landing and sort of getting within the short space, small space that has been earmarked for them, and stopping and folding wings. It's just crazy.
Wow.
So that's one. And then think of unmanned aerial vehicles being able to do combat as well. So there are unmanned aerial vehicles that can carry armament now and execute some missions that bombers and fighters have been doing erstwhile. So that's again coming in. You can refuel in the air using unmanned aerial vehicles, that unmanned aerial tankers. And then again, this autonomous and unmanned stuff is on surface, even subsurface. There are autonomous unmanned subsurface vehicles, again, sort of, which are getting inducted. So this is one area which is really mind-boggling. And again, all this requires a significant contribution from artificial intelligence, autonomous technology. So this is really opening up a new vista of warfare, as it were. And you can see some of it in real operations in Ukraine, Russia ongoing war. There is some of it in Israel, Gaza, and Israel, Lebanon, and Hezbollah. Some of it is sort of currently being executed, and there are many companies who are trying out their latest technologies in the real battlefield. So that's one area that I'm very, very excited about. Unfortunately, it may move some of my brethren and sisters who are actually flying planes out of their jobs in a decade or so from now. But I'm assuming there will be a man-unmanned teaming, and that's another concept that's coming up. It's called MUMTI. So one aeroplane is being piloted by by a pilot, and he or she then carries a flotilla, as it were, of unmanned aerial vehicles, which can be given various missions. This person is then become the mission commander. So just new vista, new possibilities are emerging, and they're just around the corner.
Amazing. And on that note, Surendra, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me. I've always been a great fan of anyone in the defense services in India. As I told you, my father and my father-in-law were both defense people. Thank you for talking to me at such length about your journey as a Navy fighter pilot, as a Navy test pilot. I think I learned many, many new things, and I'm certainly now going to go and look for Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick again, even though I saw it. And now I look at it with a different understanding of what goes behind. Thank you also for talking to me about the aerobatic team. I didn't realize that it's so complex, and for how challenging it is to be able to really fly in and out of an aircraft carrier. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.